preview the Toronto Blue Jays for 2026, up next on Fantasy Baseball Today. Welcome to On the Beat, our little mini team preview series we're doing here at Fantasy Baseball Today. I am Chris Towers, joined by Ben Nicholson-Smith, who covers the Toronto Blue Jays for Sportsnet. Make sure to give him a follow on X at B Nicholson-Smith or BNS Baseball on Blue Sky. And Ben, I hear you're a fan of the pod, so thanks for joining us.
You know what, Chris? Huge fan of the pod. You guys do great work, you and Frank and Scott, on a daily basis. Like, you're so informed about what's happening around the major leagues. Obviously, I'm dialed in on the Blue Jays, but just as a way to like keep up with the league and what's happening, it is honestly, you guys do great stuff. So I'm very happy to be joining you guys.
Thank you so much. And it's a big time to be covering the Toronto Blue Jays, coming off, the most agonizing World Series loss in Major League history, I think. But credit to the Blue Jays. They are going all in. They are making a ton of additions. As we are recording this is on January 7th. The Blue Jays are still reportedly in on both Bo Bichette and Kyle Tucker. So by the time you listen to this, some things could be out of date. That's just the nature of the beast when it comes to this Blue Jays offseason. But they have already added Dylan Cease, Tyler Rogers, Kazuma Okamoto, Cody Ponce, maybe more coming. And really, they haven't lost very much. You know, Bo Bichette in limbo, Chris Bassett, a bunch of like role players and bullpen pieces. But for the most part, it's just been net additions to a Blue Jays team that was, a tripped Andy Pages away from winning the World Series. So
right.
It's a big time for the Blue Jays, and they are all in. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the offseason? How likely do you think it is that they do make that big splash still?
Yeah, they've been so busy, and really this is kind of the culmination of a lot of things. They've been after big free agents before, landing Dylan Cease in the way that they did, very top of the market, number one starting pitcher, and doing it in November so early. That was a little bit of a different step for the Jays. And Cease, obviously, for real baseball, for fantasy baseball, that is a big deal when it comes to joining the Blue Jays in the American League East. And real bounce back potential there, clearly, when you look at the ERA and how much of that came from one bad start. And, you just look at the underlying metrics. The Blue Jays clearly believe that he's capable of a lot more. And I think that's a pretty reasonable viewpoint when you look at that, especially the ERA, which should drop a lot. But big picture, this team is intent on winning. They look pretty good. They actually look quite different in a lot of ways than the team that played for much of the 2025 season. When you think about, all right, Trey Savage, like he was basically added in the last 10 days of the regular season. He's a big part of their plans. Shane Bieber added in the last 2 months. Cease, Ponce, Rogers, like they have added a lot of outside help. So this is a different looking team, but it looks like a good team. And for fantasy players, there's a lot of value potentially to be found on this group.
Yeah, we got a couple of we're doing big questions. We're going to get some sleepers and breakout picks for them. Biggest question, I think, from a fantasy perspective is how much, if any, job security does Jeff Hoffman have as the closer here in Toronto?
I think he has job security.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's my view on it. Now, I'll explain that a little bit. Obviously, he had his ups and downs, and that included right until the very end of Game 7 of the World Series, some big swings right there, and that's not the finish that anyone in Toronto was hoping for, except for the Dodgers dugout and the family cheering section. So that being said, Jeff Hoffman has still had the support of manager John Schneider when Schneider was asked about him at the winter meetings. And when you look at how the Blue Jays handled Hoffman in the course of the 2025 season, it was an up and down season for Hoffman. But as you know, Chris, they stuck with him the entire time. They didn't pull him out of that role. They never even did it for like, hey, 2 weeks, we're going to do a little reset. They stuck with him. So I think going into the season, I would expect him to be the closer. Now, as with 99% of closers, if the performance isn't there for an extended stretch and there's a better alternative, then they would have to consider a change. But I actually think Hoffman's relatively safe going into this season. And so that's my read on it here as we sit here in January.
Real quick, this is coming to mind as you were talking. You mentioned Shane Bieber, who was added very late in the season. Is he good? Is he going to be ready? Like, there's been a little bit of uncertainty around the forearm fatigue that he dealt with late in the season. Do you have any insight there?
Yeah, it's interesting with Bieber because clearly, there's some stuff going on there as he's continuing to come back from Tommy John surgery. The extent of it, kind of unclear. The Jays haven't been super forthcoming with information on that front. But I think the real test is going to be in spring training because right now he can surely throw 20 pitches in a bullpen. All right. But the real challenge will be once it's into March, ramping up toward the regular season, he's got to build up towards 60, 75 pitches. What happens then? So here in January, hard to have a clear answer, but less than 100% healthy. But that being said, he's expected to be a part of that rotation.
Yeah, I think the hanging on to Jose Barrios despite having a seemingly full rotation gives me a little pause, but maybe that's just me being a worrier. We're going to take a quick break, come back with some sleepers and breakouts for the Toronto Blue Jays next.
The new era of UFC on Paramount Plus comes out swinging. The Highlight Machine collides with the Liverpool Phenom, and the Hall of Famer returns to take on the Bantamweight champion. UFC 324, Saturday, January 24th, only on Paramount Plus.
We're back on FBT. We're here with Ben Nicholson-Smith, who covers the Blue Jays for Sportsnet. And Ben, who's the sleeper for this team for 2026?
I'm going to go with Kazuma Okamoto, and maybe it's because he was just signed by the Blue Jays, and maybe there's a little recency bias right here. But when I look at what he did in the MPB, he was such a good hitter so consistently, and he did it in such a way that I think it should be sustainable here in Major League Baseball. And a lot of that comes down to the strikeout rate, which he had very, very low strikeout rates in MPB, walked as many times as he struck out in 2025. So that's a really good indication of his bat to ball skills and should be a good building block for him. But it's not just a slap hitter who makes contact and sprays it around the field. This is a guy who hit 30 home runs 6 different times. And of course, among the players coming over from NPB this year, it was Murakami whose power drew the most attention. But as far as game power, readiness, and then keeping in mind too that Okamoto is a very good defensive player relative to Murakami, this should allow him to stay in the lineup, make a lot of contact, and be in a very good lineup too. So I actually think this is someone at 29 years old who should be relatively in his prime. And, there's uncertainty with any player, any rookie, anyone coming over from NPB. It's not a lock. But as these things go, I think he has a chance to be a very good Major League hitter this year.
I think there's been some hand wringing about there was is he going to be a super utility or a utility player? There was a report a couple days ago about that. I kind of love that because let's get first base eligibility. Let's get third base eligibility. Outfield eligibility? Maybe second base. Is that asking too much?
Maybe second would be a stretch. I mean, you never know in the course of a long season. The way the Jays operate, they have Kirk at catcher every day, Vladdy at first every day, Varsho in center. Otherwise, they move guys around. And that can be a good thing for the Jays as far as real baseball. But obviously, as far as this audience, it's kind of useful to have those guys that can slot in at multiple positions. And I would think for Okamoto, outfield, I think he'll get some outfield reps in spring. So that'll determine whether he actually plays there in the regular season and ultimately gets that eligibility. But I think first and third base, too, you're talking about someone who will definitely get third base eligibility. And I would think first because he's the logical guy to play behind Vlad.
All right, let's talk about a breakout pick, and I think it's going to be someone else who could have some positional flexibility too.
Exactly. For breakout, I would go Addison Barger, and he had a good year in 2025 and obviously culminated in the World Series, hitting a pinch hit grand slam. That's a pretty big moment for a young player, but this is someone who played in 135 games, ended up with right around 500 plate appearances. And so I think part of the reason there could be a breakout potential here is if he simply gets more playing time. And as you mentioned off the top, there is the caveat of, hey, if the Jays do sign Kyle Tucker, that would shift things, then, reassess. But as we sit here right now, Addison Barger has a pathway to getting, first of all, reps against right-handed pitching. And then if he can excel in that role and kind of follow that Matt Wallner, Kerry Carpenter template of just crushing right-handed pitching, and Addison Barger, for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, the power on this guy, it's outrageous. The exit velos, the swing speed, it's all there when you look at the metrics. So that should give him a foundation where he excels against righties, has that positional versatility. And then if he can do some damage against lefties, you're talking about someone whose playing time could go up in a good lineup. And you're looking at someone who could kind of put it together with a bit of a more full offensive profile.
All right, that was Ben Nicholson-Smith from Sportsnet. Make sure you follow him on X at B Nicholson-Smith or at BNS Baseball on Blue Sky. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insights. And for more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to our full-length podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to the On the Beat Team Preview Series. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.